Okay. My name is Kathy, and I am with the Office of Arts and Culture, and over there, fiddling with the camera, is my assistant today, and her name is Peyton Morley, and we represent the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. She is videotaping the session, but don't worry, none of your faces will be in it. Mostly it's because there are some people who work day and night jobs and absolutely have no way of attending any of the workshops, and so we want to at least make an online version available for them. And also it's helpful for any of you if you miss something, or I go through really quickly on something and you want just to remember something. It's also a way you can, like in the middle of the night when you're working on the grant, you can go online and look it up and be able to access the information. So just making sure everyone is here for the City of Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture's Civic Partner Grant Application Information Session. Very long title. So what we're going to go over today is I am going to quickly kind of go through the application process and what the expectations are and things that will help you put in the best application possible. We will also be joined by our colleague Diana Falchuk, who works for the Office for Civil Rights, because a new element this year is a component of the application that she'll be helping to manage. And then we'll take questions at the very end. Normally I like to be a little bit more interactive and have people ask questions as I go through, but because today's the session we'll be videotaping, it's much cleaner for people watching the video if I could just kind of get through all the information, and then we'll do questions and answers at the end. So if you have questions, just jot them down so you don't forget them, but then that way you don't have to focus on them. And hopefully, by the time we get to the end, maybe some of those questions will already be answered. But since there's actually just a small group, I was just wondering, I'm going to just ask a few questions so I can get a sense. How many of you have applied for this funding program before, either in the most recent round or in the past? Okay, personally applied, okay. And then how many of you have never applied to this funding program before? You may have applied to other programs in our office. Okay, so never applied before. So out of the ones who never applied, how many of you have never applied for anything in our office before? Okay, good. That just gives me a sense of where we're at. Since we're kind of evenly divided, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over all the stuff that will be good for everyone to know, and then if there are things that I think might be helpful without being too redundant for people who've applied before, I will go into those. But there may be some things that I won't go into as deeply, so for the newer people, maybe we'll be able to address some of those things in the question and answer portion. So this is for our Cultural Partnership Civic Partners Program, and what that means is this is basically our organizational funding program, where we fund arts and cultural organizations and service organizations and heritage organizations whose primary purpose is around arts and culture. We will allow for some organizations that may be not-for-profit, but are, I hope that stops soon, that are not-for-profit, but are where maybe their whole mission isn't about arts and culture, but they have a very strong program that's housed within that organization. They're allowed to apply as long as they meet certain qualifications, and they can only really apply for that program out of their organization. So as an example, there's a fabulous organization in South Park that is a not-for-profit organization that serves a very specific cultural community. They do a lot of incredible work, but only one tiny part of what they do is arts and culturally related. So they can apply, but they can't represent their whole organization in like the budget and all that stuff. They really need to just reflect the arts and cultural component of their work in the application, because A, it confuses the panelists, and B, it actually, a lot of the way that our funding works is based on budget size, and it's not fair for a multi-million-dollar organization to apply when maybe only $200,000 of their entire budget is on arts and culture. It would not be fair to the rest of you, smaller organizations. So if you think you fit into that category, do contact me separately or ask in the question and answer session. I can go over some of that. But in the guidelines and on our website, and actually I will hand out, when we get to the middle part of our program, when we talk about the new part, of our application, I will hand out a handout, and at the bottom of that there will be a web link to the page that you will need to go to online, and that's how you access the online grant, and that's also how you access the guidelines and other support materials that you'll need to download. So I would encourage all of you to access that sooner than later, and that way a lot more of this workshop will make sense. But the basic information is, again, this is an organizational support program, and you are being evaluated based on your organization and in its entirety, not just on a specific project, so it's not a project-based grant. The deadline for this is on June 30th at 11 p.m. It is an online application, and if there are any there are some organizations where, for whatever reason, an online application may not be completely accessible. So in extreme hardship cases, contact me as early as possible, and we can make other accommodations to work with you to be able to still be able to submit it online, because it's the only way the panels will be able to evaluate it, but we can do some workarounds to help you get it online. So do contact us if that's the situation. We do try to be as accessible as possible. The Office of Arts and Culture is the main government agency in the City of Seattle government that our main purpose is to help uplift all the arts and culture and make it available for all the residents and people who live and work and visit Seattle. So this program is housed under our Cultural Partnerships team, and the main reason for that is our Cultural Partnerships team is really focused on how we partner with artists and arts and cultural and heritage organizations to make arts available to the broader community of Seattle. And so what you're actually applying for is the opportunity to be a partner with us in doing that. Because there's so many arts and cultural organizations in the City of Seattle, we are one of the most arts rich cities in the world, actually, and definitely in the United States. On the one hand, that's a great positive for everyone living and working here in the city. On the other hand, it does make it more competitive for all of you. So one of the things I will caution you is that this is a very competitive grant program. No longer can we say that everyone who applies who fits the criteria for being an arts and cultural organization will get funded. That's just the reality, because literally in the last 5 years, for instance, we've more than doubled the number of applicants, but our funding is still level. We're still lucky in that a lot of other arts funders, their funding has actually declined. We're still level, but with that many more arts and cultural organizations applying to us, we can't fund everybody without diluting how much we fund the organizations that do get funding to the point where it doesn't actually help anybody. And so because of that, the first step of you coming to this workshop is going to help. But even coming to the workshop is not going to guarantee that you'll get funding, and I just want to make that clear. So really do look over the guidelines and make sure that you feel that this program is the best fit. There are other grant funding programs, which I will briefly cover only because sometimes organizations find that maybe some of the other funding programs fit better, and it might make more sense in terms of time and energy to apply for those instead. This program does have the most complicated, in-depth application, partly because of it's the best way to kind of help the panelists decide who out of those who applied should get the funding. And so some of our other grant programs are less competitive, and actually sometimes the grant amounts that you would get are actually even higher. So we, besides the organizational funding program, we do have individual artist funding programs. So if you're actually an individual artist, it actually makes more sense to apply for those. We also have a neighborhood and community arts funding program, and that funds groups who really focus on consistent, reoccurring arts programming that can be festivals, or it's a program that continues again and again and again, year after year. And even though it's might not, like art walks, people might not call them festivals, but that if it's something that you do on a regular basis annually every year, you might do it like 5 times a year, but you do it every year and it's basically the same format, that might actually qualify under our festival funding program. So I would encourage groups who do that and are neighborhood based or culturally based to possibly consider that funding program. That one only gives currently $1,200 per grant, but it's a much simpler application. And you can apply to it every year as opposed to this one where you can only apply to it every 2 years. And so that one's actually one that's more accessible in some ways. And even though it might seem like the grant amount is small, in this program, out of all the organizations, and we're talking from ones who are $21 million organizations down to ones who have annual budgets of less than $20,000, the median grant that is given in this program is only currently $3,155. So for the amount of effort, in any organization that has an annual budget of less than $100,000 probably will only get somewhere between $500 to $1,000. So that's where the neighborhood and community arts one might be more beneficial for less time if you fit those criteria. And the next deadline for that will be in the fall, and it will be for 2016 projects. We also have a youth arts funding program, and that one is specifically focuses on organizations that do programs that serve youth between middle and high school age youth that are outside of a regular school setting. So after school, summertime, things like that, weekends. And so if you have a program that your organization does, it may not be all that your organization does, but if you have a program that does that, and especially if it serves underserved youth, and you use a professional artist in that program, that actually might be a better program because their funding amounts are actually higher than the median one for this one. And again, that one you can apply to every year and be able to qualify. You can actually apply to that one and this program too, though, so you can go to both. We also have a Smart Ventures funding program. That's probably our easiest program to get funding through. And it funds between $500 and $1,000 grants. There is no set deadline, though you do need to contact our office at least 2 months before the project that you want to try to apply for funding to access. It does prioritize projects that serve either things that are outside of the ordinary, unique, innovative, serve diverse communities, or even are cross-sector, like serving in the more social service realm that use arts as a way to do that. And so it's a kind of a grant program that kind of fits for groups that have things that are more outside the box. You can apply for that and get funding through that program up to 3 times. And so it's a nice way for, if you've never applied to our office before, a lot of groups like to start there and then learn how to apply to our office and then be able to move into this larger funding program. So that's a great option to start into. And then we also have a cultural facilities program if you have a venue and a space. And we also have a work readiness program if you're interested in working with Seattle Youth Employment Youth. Those are a little bit more specialized programs, so only if someone's really interested in those, you can ask me at the end and I can go into more detail about those. Okay, so I know, and just so you know, this is one of those talking head workshops, and I apologize for that in advance. So the way that Civic Partner Funding works is basically you will submit an application online, then a panel will go through all the applications. The last time we did this, we had almost 200 applications, so it's a lot. So we give them a lot of time to review them all. And then they meet over a course of a week. That's how long it takes to get through all the applications and talk about each of them. Every applicant gets reviewed, and every application gets discussed with an equal amount of time. And then they basically score every application based on criteria that are in the guidelines. And then from that scoring, there's a ranking that happens. And then basically, depending on how much money we anticipate getting in our budget, we go through the ranking. And we have a whole matrix based on your budget category size and the score that you got. And that determines who will get funding or who won't. Now, we actually don't find out how much money we'll have in this specific program or any of our programs until literally mid to late January of each year. So just know that even though you'll be applying at the end of June, the panel's reviewing all the applications over the summer. They meet in the early fall to review everything. Then it has to go through several layers of review process for approval. And then I find out what the list of recommended based on the ranking scores are. We get what we hope will be our budget from City Council, usually it's the very end of November, beginning of December, but it's just our overall office's budget with what might likely be our budget, and from that I'm kind of putting together what the rough allocations might be, but we really can't really tell people until the end of the year if you're likely to get funded or not, and then we won't be able to give the exact amounts that you're going to be funded for if you get selected for possible funding until late January. And I tell that people now in the workshop because almost more than any other question I get from July through the end of the year is people emailing and calling going, when will I find out when I get funding and how much will I get? And my response is always, it's in the guidelines and what we went over in the workshop. I can't tell you anything until the end of the year. So we just ask people to be patient. This is for funding for 2016 calendar year and 2017 calendar year. So even though it is a more complex, in-depth application, the positive side is if you get selected for funding, you don't have to apply again for 2 years, hopefully. We did have a case last year where traditionally we've only funded about 130 organizations through this program. The last 2 years we actually chose to fund about 170 organizations, and it's because there were literally about 40 organizations who had gotten funding for years and years and years, some of them decades, and they would not have been funded otherwise. It has been a huge increase in workload for the office. It was very challenging. I can't guarantee that we can do that again because we've really found that the capacity, it meant 120 extra hours of work for our staff just to manage those extra 40 groups where we didn't actually have extra funding to pay staff anything additional. So it was really like staff volunteering, committing to being willing to take on that extra burden. And what we did to be able to have funding available to give those organizations, and we're talking basically $500 each, was we had to cut back on a lot of other administrative costs, which also hindered us in a lot of other ways. So we tried to do it for 2 years to just see how it would work out. We love the fact that we were able to fund that many more groups, but it was a huge challenge, so I just can't guarantee that that's going to happen again. So again, just know that that the more we convey in the workshops, just that we don't necessarily have the capacity because of doing that last year, be able to respond to every single email in a timely fashion to let you know that we can't give you that answer. So in these workshops, I kind of make the plea that always go back to the guidelines first. And if you can't find the answer in the guidelines, then do feel free to contact us. And I hate messaging that because in the past we used to say, contact us for anything. But it's either way how many more organizations we can be able to serve or that capacity. And so, but we also don't want you to waste your capacity searching for something that's hard to find either. So if you absolutely can't find it, do contact us. We do want to be able to help you. Okay. So a lot of this stuff is in the guidelines, so I'm going to go through the stuff that is pretty easy and straightforward in the guidelines because I don't want to spend too much time on that since you can actually read it yourself. Again, if what's in the written application is something that is hard and not accessible for some people because of site issues and you need things in other formats, you can always feel free to contact us and we can try to figure out another way to make the information accessible to you. That's the other reason why we videotape the workshop, so that in some ways you can consider it a podcast that someone can listen to if reading the guidelines is challenging. So the Civic Partner Funding Program is basically, even though it's organizational support, so we are funding your organization if you're selected for funding, but you do need to still contract with us if you get selected for funding for a specific project. So the main thing that you have to have if you get funding is you have to have some public event that's going to happen in the calendar years 2016 and 2017 that's arts and culturally or heritage related or serving the arts community, that is accessible and open to the public in some way. We do consider things that happen in public schools public enough. And that's really the main criteria. It has to take place in Seattle. So what we cannot fund are things that don't take place in Seattle, even if you're based in Seattle. We can't, through this program, fund anything that's like, you know, facility improvements or purchase of equipment. We currently cannot fund through this program school, college, or university departments in which the program is a part of the regular curriculum. And then anything that are religious services or events or presentations or fundraising is the main focus. So if the only event you're doing is a fundraiser to raise money for your organization, unfortunately that doesn't qualify because of some federal restrictions on government funding. But the main eligibility to be able to qualify if your organization can apply is you're based in Seattle. We do know that there's more and more organizations that don't have a physical address anymore. So if you have questions about that, you can contact me. But being based in Seattle, you have a mission that is arts and culturally related, that you have a minimum of a 3-year programmatic history. That means that you might have set yourself up as an organization, you know, decades ago, but if you haven't been doing, like, offering public arts and culture events for the public to enjoy over the last 3 years, then that doesn't count. But on the other hand, you might not have set yourself up as a legitimate entity, meaning, you know, gotten yourself a business license and all that stuff, but you've been doing regular programmatic activity for decades. You might actually be able to qualify as long as you can meet the legal aspects before you submit your application. But you do have to demonstrate that you have a history of doing stuff for at least 3 years. You do have to be not-for-profit structure. Does not mean you have to be a 501c3. We're one of the few arts funders that do not require that you have a federally recognized nonprofit status, but you do have to be set up as a not-for-profit in the state of Washington. There's a difference. You don't need to have it when you apply, but you do need to have it if you get selected for funding. Before you can get funding is the City of Seattle business license. And you have to have at least one ongoing cultural or arts program that you do in Seattle. And again, there's more definitions on the different categories that you might fall into in our guidelines. I'm not going to go into those in depth because there's actually, like, I think, a page of information about that. So you can review that. So how do we determine, you know, what are the panelists looking at? So, as I said, there's a panel of peers. It's a group of people. Last cycle, we actually had 13 people reviewing all the applications. They represent people who work for arts and cultural organizations, lots of times not in Seattle, because we try to find people who don't have a conflict of interest with anyone who's applied. But they might be people who have retired a couple of years ago from having run an arts organization, and or they might be someone who is a graduate student who is studying arts administration, or they might be someone who used to live in Seattle and is just visiting Seattle and happens to be here for the perfect amount of time, or they might be someone who's in King County or elsewhere in the state. We try to find people who know enough about arts and culture and running an organization to be able to evaluate all your organizations, but at the same time making sure that there's going to be the minimum amount of conflict of interest so that everyone has a fair review. It's a very diverse panel of people that represent all age, demographics, gender, ethnicity, race, a wide variety of faculty, neighborhood, geographic spread, arts discipline, and it's because we want to make sure that it's a diverse enough panel that whatever discipline or geography or demographic community that you serve, it's going to be well represented in the knowledge and expertise of the panel. But the things that they are looking at when they review your applications is, and again, this is there's a whole page of this in the application as well, so I won't go too much in depth. I want to at least cover these because this is what they're going to evaluate your applications on. So the more that you can respond to the questions in the application to demonstrate your strengths in these areas, the stronger your application will be reviewed. And there, you'll actually see the scoring range of how they have to score, and so you can see what's the most weighted. So the biggest thing that they're weighting on is 40 points out of 100 points that they're scoring is on public access and benefit of your organization. And this is basically, they're looking at the community you serve, is really, and who the artists are that you work with, and basically the public impact that your organization has in the community. So what does that mean? Public impact. It's basically that you provide opportunities for audiences, artists, volunteers, donors, collaborators, supporters to work with your organization. That you are helping to diversify the arts and cultural opportunities that are available for the people in Seattle, and diversify in a wide range of things. Like I said, it could be geography, you might serve a unique neighborhood, you might serve a unique demographic of people based on age or physical ability or race or ethnicity. You might create access in a way that is unique to all the other arts and cultural organizations based on the discipline that you provide. But the most important thing is that you're creating some sort of meaningful arts experience that really reflects and is relevant to people in Seattle. And it could be going really deep in serving one demographic, or it can be really broad and serving a lot of people across a wide range. We really are kind of evaluating apples to oranges, but the main thing that the panelists are looking at is whether they feel that what you do really does create public impact. So some examples of that. You might be a culturally specific organization that serves the historically underrepresented demographic in Seattle. Like for instance, you might be a group that serves the deaf community and provides arts and cultural experiences for the deaf community. And so even though you might not be reaching thousands and thousands of people with your programming, the hundreds of people that you're reaching, or even the dozens of people that you're reaching, you have huge, deep impact with, because you're maybe the only organization that serves that demographic, and no one else is doing that. Or you may be a large arts and cultural organization that maybe has 3 different programs that you do each year, where you basically put the programs on in your space, and a lot of people come, and you're serving thousands of people, but it's light touch, meaning all they do is they come to your program, they see it, they enjoy it, and then they leave, and so maybe it's not as deep an engagement as, say, the other organization, but you're serving a lot of different people. That's just as valuable as the other one. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to feel like you have to be serving tens of thousands of people. On the other hand, you don't have to feel like you have to be spending hundreds of hours with one very specific community. It can be an amalgam of those things, but that in some way you're making a difference using arts and culture for people in Seattle. I will say though that the public access and benefit, one of the things that does come up is there may be certain arts disciplines where there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of groups doing a very similar thing. And I will say that the panelists are probably going to be a little bit more, how can I say, they'll probably look at those applications in a way where they will maybe see who rises to the top out of all of those organizations, as compared to other organizations where you may be the only organization doing this type of arts programming in this particular area of Seattle for this demographic. And because you serve a unique niche that no one else does, that is actually an advantage to you in this funding program. And it's only because, again, we're looking to make sure that there's something for everyone in terms of arts and culture, and that all people in Seattle, regardless of race, gender, age, demographic, or geography, etc., are served. And so that is where they are going to be kind of being a little bit more critical, probably, of organizations that might overlap with lots and lots of other organizations. So if you might fall into that, and I'll just, as a hint, say that in the last round, we probably had 40-some choral groups, was probably the most competitive. And they all had different missions, but you really need to work that much harder to make your organization stand out in that. I will say that there was only one organization that specifically served the deaf community, so they kind of have a heads up. There were actually a couple that serve the people who are blind, and so they still, it's because there's only two that helps them, right? So it does help if you are more unique, and the more that, and I guess the main point behind that is you can't help what you do, and in fact, you should celebrate what you do. Every organization should celebrate what you do, but the important thing in the application is you're going to really have to convince a panel of why you, amongst all of these other arts and culture organizations that do what you do, stand out and are unique, and how can you lift yourself above that in a genuine way. Do not lie about what you do. Do not oversell what you do, because a lot of these panelists we try to choose people who actually go out and experience things in the city, and if you say, like, we serve this, and this, and we do this, and this, and a panelist on the panel, and they go, I went to the last event, and they definitely did not do that, it comes across even worse than if just were very transparent and said, this is what we do and this is what we're great at, and really be honest about that. This is not, grant applications are not a place to, and there is a cultural difference. Some cultures, it's very hard for some people in certain cultures to brag about what they do and to highlight what they do. I will say that one of the things in grant applications in this country, you do have to kind of sell yourself, and it may be uncomfortable for some people to do, but the only way the panelists know who you are is what you put on the paper, so don't undersell yourself either. When I talk about being truthful and genuine, do highlight the things that are really standout, remarkable things that you do. Don't sell yourself short either, because a lot of them may only have heard of you in name and might not know the details of what you do, so don't assume that they know something that they might not. So anyway, so public impact and access and benefit is like the biggest part of the grant, 40%, so really focus on that one. Then the second thing, that's worth 35 points, so this is just almost as important. This is merit and impact of the program in relation to a stated artistic cultural mission. So in this section, the panelists are looking at your mission statement, and how they were instructed to evaluate this is to really look at your mission statement and see how well you actually, through your programs and services and what you've stated in your application, serve your own mission. And this is the best way we've been able to help panelists be able to weight how they evaluate an organization that's a $25 million organization serving hundreds of thousands of people, and a small organization that only has a $10,000 budget and only serves like 200 people. It's because they're looking at your mission. So, a large institution, their mission might be to offer the highest quality symphonic music experience for people in Seattle and make Seattle like the exemplary place where symphonic music is performed. The panelists will evaluate, that mission against the work. So does it seem like the artists that they use are of the highest quality and caliber? Does it feel like from the audience numbers that they really do, make Seattle seem like it's a regional hub for this, So they're looking at that. But another organization may be, we want to give everyone who wants to play a musical instrument a chance to perform. Right? And that may be their mission. And so for them, they may not do auditions at all. Anyone who wants to play can play. And so their music may not be the highest quality, right? But they never said that that was their mission they want to give the experience. So what the panelists are going to be looking at there is whether they've really made how they find musicians inclusive, whether they're really doing outreach to make sure that everyone who wants to play a musical instrument is able to. Have they made considerations for people who may not be able to afford buying a musical instrument? Because if that's the barrier and they haven't provided for that, that's not really serving their mission, right? So they're weighing each organization based on your mission. So really the best way to strengthen your application in terms of this is your mission really clear? And does it seem like the programs and services and the things that you do really do serve that mission. And you'd be surprised how many arts and cultural organizations have had a mission that they've had for like 40 years, and in half of the programs and services that they offer really do not intersect with that mission at all. This is also, the other way I like to look at grant applications is they're really, even though it might seem like, oh my gosh, we have to spend so much time putting this together, but they're a really good tool, whether you even end up submitting them or not, for an organization's staff, volunteers, boards, and artists to really look at your own organization and really evaluate yourselves and do a self-assessment of, are we really doing what we set out to do? So this is we structure the questions to really help organizations do that. And this is one where I will say a lot of organizations might be very surprised to realize how, at least in the way that they present themselves, are not actually completely aligning their programs and services with what their actual stated mission is. So in that case, you might want to look at, maybe it's time for the board to do a retreat with staff and relook at your mission or relook at the programs and services. But anyway, so it's really looking at the clarity of your mission and goals, the quality of your programs in relation to those goals, and whether there's expertise, and it doesn't have to be from paid staff at all. A lot of the organizations that apply have completely volunteer staffs, but it could be staff, board, volunteer, artists. Is there expertise in the organization to actually carry out that mission? And that it feels like the organization has some recognition in the community for the work that they do based on that mission. And then the third criteria that we evaluate applications for is on organizational soundness and capacity. And this is really looking at, even though this is just a 2-year funding program, and we don't expect any organization to apply to expect to be around in perpetuity for eternity. We are really looking at, does it seem like it's an organization who, based on what they say they do, and based on their experience and credentials of their board, staff, and artists, will they actually be able to follow through and actually still be around in 2 years that we're funding them to actually carry out these programs and services? Because there's some people who come in with applications and it sounds like everything they do is great, but then when you look at whether it seems like they can actually carry that out, if you look at their budgets, if you look at their fiscal strength and their history, it seems like they've had a very rocky past, and then there's not a lot of confidence that no matter how wonderful their programs and services might be, that they'll actually be able to carry that out. So this is really weighing whether an organization can actually carry it out based on the credentials of the people involved with the organization, on realistic budgets, on your your past history of event programming, audience attendance, and fiscal strength. That you've got resources for getting funds outside of just this grant, and that you have consistent activity. And there are some different red flags that the panelists have around these things. So if any of these things are things where you are a little bit worried that you might not like, maybe you've been in debt for the last few years, and you're worried about that. I will say that for this question, in the narrative section in particular, the panelists value people being really genuine about where they are and realistic about what they're trying to do about it, and that stands for much more than someone who tries to sell themselves as something that they're not. And none of the stuff that they've presented kind of aligns with what they say they intend to do. So as an example, if you're an organization who's been in the red for a few years, but in your application you actually admit, like, we are in the red. I mean, we've been in the red. Here's the reasons why, we got to the situation. This is what we've been doing to try to get out of it. This is our strategic plan for taking down our debt, and this is how we've made changes already to address the situation. That will probably score a little bit higher than an organization who comes in and says, who doesn't even admit that they have a fiscal problem, but clearly in the financials they are in debt, and that they don't even address like how they're going to get out of the problem, but they talk about next year we're going to have hundreds of people come to our events and we're going to raise this much money, but they don't really talk about how they're going to get from the fact that they've been in debt to all of a sudden raising all this extra money. And the panelists are like, well, how do you get from here to here? Because all these panelists have run arts and culture organizations before, and they know that you can't just all of a sudden change things overnight unless you have a strategic plan to do so, and are being very realistic about that plan. But if nothing is said about that in the application, it just feels like you're trying to sell them on a false future that's not supported by the history of what your organization application shows, right? So again, being transparent and genuine is going to be much more valuable in this process than trying to oversell what you can realistically accomplish. And then, so that's, like I said, 20 points. So total of those 3 areas that the panel will be evaluating is worth 95 points. Now, the additional 5 points this year that will bring it up to a 100-point score is the new component, which is a racial equity assessment. Now, a lot of people are like, whoa, what is that? And Diana, who is my colleague from the Office for Civil Rights, she'll be here to help go over that more in depth in today's workshop. So right now I'm just going to skim through it really lightly, and she'll go over to help explain it a little bit more in depth. But it's basically a 2-page, up to 2-page assessment. There's some specific questions we want you to respond to. The most important thing is to be transparent in it, and she'll go more into depth about what that means. But basically, if you submit one and it feels like you actually took the time to actually respond, with transparency and genuineness, no matter where you are in the spectrum of your organization in terms of addressing racial equity. And we are talking about institutionalized racism inside your organization. Then you will get, up to the 5 points. You'll get the 5 points. If you do not submit it at all, you will not get 5 points. You'll just get 5 points deducted off your application. And some organizations may choose to, like, we can't even deal with this, so we're not going to submit it, and you'll just automatically get 5 points knocked off. Some organizations may submit it, but it's really clear that it was like one person responding to it like the night before and just trying to make up answers for the organization, and obviously it didn't feel like there was any conversation with other people in the organization to do that. And most likely it was probably like a stressed out grant writer throwing the application together. And in that case, you may not get the full 5 points, but you'll at least maybe get a point for trying to throw something together. And believe me, both Diana and I we used to do a lot of grant writing ourselves, so we can see some of those things. And so just know that that's kind of how the points will work for that. But the most important thing is that these 5 points will not be submitted to the panelists. No panelists will read this. It will not play any role in even subconscious perception of how they view your application. We are really doing this assessment because especially if you watch the news every day in this country, race is a huge issue. It has always been a huge issue, but now finally there's enough media attention and people talking about it that we can no longer continue to operate in the status quo, because the status quo basically is structurally racist. And so as a government agency that's being supported by taxpayer dollars, we need to be able to serve everyone in the city equitably. Over 30% of our city's population are people of color, and there is statistically a huge disparity in who has had access and who is being served by that. And the only way we're going to change it is not through Band-Aid diversity programs, but is really looking at the institutional structures, and each organization is an institutional structure that uphold the status quo, that make things continue to be inequitable. And so what we want to encourage is for every arts or cultural organization in the city to look at their own institutionalized racism and really try to figure out how they can become more inclusive, and that we all work together to address this. And so we do not want to penalize people for not being there yet or not having started, but we do want to motivate people to start. So the assessment is really about being really candid about where you are and what you think you need to help you be able to do this work. And so it's for me and Diane to be able to look at that and know what kind of workshops, training programs, resources that we need to create, tools that we need to create to help organizations be able to get there. So that's the purpose of it. It's not meant to like also penalize people in the grant making process. But I will tell you that every year for the last 5 years we've actually been ramping up on what we've been asking people to address. And so like I said, this year's how we structured it so that we could get an honest assessment from people. But with each progressive application cycle in the future, there will probably be new elements to help make sure that people are actually implementing the plans that they're setting out to do. So just know that that will be coming down the line. But unlike there's other cities who automatically said, like Portland, for instance, they said, this was like 3 years ago, I think, they also said we want to do racial equity, so all of a sudden they made it a requirement that in order for you to actually get funds from the city, you had to do this, this, and this, and this right now in this application cycle. And it was a lot of our, it's impossible. 400 years it's taken to build up to where we are, racial crisis that we are in, you know, our country right now. It's not going to change overnight, but it can't change unless we start. But to ask organizations also to do it overnight is impossible, and it just creates a lot of people feeling, it actually became very divisive. Organizations that had never been doing it felt like they were competing against organizations who had been doing it, and both sides felt like no one was winning, and it actually was not serving the ultimate goal, which is we want to create true equity for everybody. And really, because the demographics are changing in our country, by 2042, the majority of our population will be communities of color, and that if arts and culture organizations want to be sustainable and viable for the long term, it's important that we start looking at how we can all become more inclusive and really engage with as many communities as possible, so that for your long-term health, these are things you should already be looking at, and if you haven't already, now is a good time to start, and we're helping to, as I said, our job at the city in this office is to create as vibrant and rich of an arts and cultural sector as possible. And so this is another way we're looking at in trying to help make all of your organizations as sustainable and vibrant going into the future as possible as well. Okay, there's again the timeline that I kind of went over earlier in terms of when you find out anything is in the guidelines, so we'll go over that here. But basically, end of year, you'll submit it by June 30th, and then the end of the year, you'll find out if you've been selected for funding, and then the beginning of next year, you'll find out what amount that will be. So tips for success. I've already kind of alluded to some of them, but the most important thing is read the guidelines. Or if reading is not easy for you, this is being videotaped and you can listen to it kind of as a podcast, even while you're working on the grant. But the more that you follow what the guidelines actually talk about, the stronger your application will be. There are also online instructions that go into more depth. Even though it feels like it takes time, I encourage you to read the instructions because we added this new racial equity section, we've actually been trying to cut out different things in the application itself to simplify it. So there are sections where we actually ask you to skip certain things, and we actually tell you, please just answer this in this thing. So you don't even think about it, just answer this. We actually cut out, we used to ask you for 4 years of financial information, staff information, programmatic information. We're only asking you for 3 years now in exchange for it.